Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Go4Leadership podcast. And I can introduce Brian McCarthy, who is our guest today.
Go for Leadership interviews.
Welcome, Brian.
Hi, Daniel. Lovely to be here.
Perfect. And like always, it would be great that you give me a quick introduction in 30 seconds, who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm the founder of a company, a consultancy based here in Barcelona, Spain, called Performing Ideas. And basically, we help people form and perform their ideas. And we help them get their best work out into the world. And we do that in the areas of leadership, communication, and innovation.
Awesome. And leadership is, of course, our key. So my next question would go, how would you define leadership, or what does leadership mean to you?
So I won't define leadership because I don't like definitions of leadership. Also, I think they're kind of boring. Everyone gives the same definitions. I would say one thing that's often forgotten about leadership, which is that when people talk about leadership, they talk about the leader leading a group of people. But I think we often forget that the leader is usually in the middle, that there's people above the leader and there's people below the leader. And as a leader, you have to keep two sets of people happy. And sometimes, or maybe even often, the desires or the aims of those two groups of people aren't exactly aligned. So you might have, the top bosses in a company. You're a leader in a company, but you've got the executive committee above you. And the executive committee perhaps are asking you to implement certain things that maybe go against what your team want. So it's this careful balancing between trying to make both groups of people happy. And there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's a balancing act. And I think that's something that's often forgotten about in leadership.
I think that's a great aspect that we have not touched yet in our podcast, because like you said, you have so many stakeholders, and most likely it not only is your boss or your employees, it's maybe even more. You have maybe a supervisory board that you need to, let's say, fulfill the needs. Maybe you have also clients in a more client-oriented role. How do you think as a leader you can, let's say, be still yourself by serving all these different stakeholders and let's say come to your or define your leadership style? Because I think all the different groups, like you said, have different needs and different aspects that require stuff or aspects from you. How would you describe as a good way to be still yourself, but at the same time fulfill their different needs?
Well, I suppose you have to have a very clear set of values and know what it is that you think is right and what is wrong. And you try your best not to do what is wrong. And you kind of have your own moral compass in terms of values. Because, of course, there are many decisions that are not major decisions, and maybe they're minor decisions. But often decisions, even the small ones, you're gonna run into conflict with them. And maybe this is one of the aspects of a leader, which is that at the end of the day, as the leader, you have to, the buck stops with you, as they say. You're the one that has to make that final decision. And maybe you're not going to make everyone happy. So you need to justify it to yourself why you're making these decisions. I think the other thing is that you need to be able to see that world of competing interests that are revolving around you. Sometimes in a lot of leadership stuff that I see, they talk about, leading yourself, which is hugely important. And then it's about leading teams, leading your team. That's also very important. But it's kind of forgotten that you're going to have to lead the people above you as well. Or maybe you don't lead them, but you're going to have to make them happy. And that's often left out of the equation. And it's a very important part of the equation too.
So I have been in many different situations, of course, where maybe you have answers to your superior that you know or already know he won't like. How would you describe as a good approach of also in particular young leaders that are becoming, let's say, more experienced in their leadership and their style as well? What advice would you give those leaders, let's say, that maybe need to bring a difficult message across to their superiors? Because I mean, you always are dependent also on the superior, right, for your own development and job.
Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of experience in this. I suppose this is the area where I'm most experienced and where my company is most experienced, which is in the area of communication, which is where we started. We started off in communication and then later branched into leadership and in the last 7 or 8 years into innovation. So in terms of communication and communicating bad news, let's call it, there's a couple of things that are very important to take into account. So first of all, if you're communicating bad news to your superiors and you're young and maybe you don't have a lot of confidence, there is a tendency to just present the data, the results, not present any argument, not present any news, just present numbers and statistics and hand them to your superiors on a plate, as if to say, okay, you make the decision, here's the information, you need to make the decision. And that kind of, I see people doing that a lot because it means that they avoid confrontation because they're not really saying anything. They're just providing data. However, you're not going to get very far in your career if you do that because let's take executive committee level. When people come in to present to executive committee level, that's the last thing they want. The last thing they want is someone just presenting numbers and data, which is what happens a lot in those kind of presentations. What they want is they want you, the presenter, to come in, no matter what age you are, young or old, or whatever amount of or experience you have, but come in with an argument, come in with a recommendation based on the data and the statistics, based on the numbers, because what they're looking for from you, they don't have the time to kind of go in depth into this data to figure out what to do. That's why they've asked you to do it. They want you to go look at the situation, look at it rationally, logically, and suggest a course of action. Now, sometimes the thing is, of course, the problem is sometimes that course of action, is going to piss them off, or they're not going to be happy with it. But it's not making it personal. It's like this, based on logic and based on reason and based on numbers, this is the course of action I would suggest. I mean, that would be the first thing I would say about presenting bad news. I mean, the second thing I would say about presenting bad news, let's call this presenting to a hostile audience. So whenever you present to a hostile audience, you need to spend the first, I would say, minimum third, if not half of your talk, if we're talking about presentations or even in conversation, you need to spend a good portion of time showing your audience, your hostile audience, that you understand why they're hostile. You understand why they're against your ideas. Show them that you understand their pain. Show it to them in such a way that halfway through they're thinking, oh my God, this guy I wish I was able to explain it as well as he's explained it. Like, he understands perfectly how I feel. And only when you've got to that point can you then introduce this argument, this message, this bad news that they're not going to like, but they have to feel that you understand them before you can do that and before you have any hope of persuading them. So those would be the two main pieces of advice based on my experience that I would give to someone presenting bad news.
I think that's very powerful, and one element that I observe by the two, let's say, ways, is that you as a leader or as somebody that brings this message across in both areas, you need a lot of empathy. My strong belief is, in particular as a leader, and I think that came also out of your different statements, is that empathy is very important in order to be able to understand, let's say, your leader's need and how you would reply to the problem that you want to solve, and maybe also the recommendation. For somebody that maybe is, let's say, poor in empathy skills, let's say it this way, how how do you think you could use maybe certain tactics or techniques to become better in understanding the opponent's needs? Also, I mean, from a client side or from a other, your superior side.
Well, I think that empathy, let's just call it understanding your audience, knowing their needs, is something that, unfortunately, that's missing a lot, not just in the professional world, but also in the personal world. And it's this idea. It means that we, so a lot of the time when we have an opportunity to speak to a group of people, like make a presentation, or we have an opportunity to meet someone we've been looking forward to meet, we get a chance to have coffee or lunch with the boss, or we get to meet that client that we've been waiting for months to get to see. And when we have that opportunity, and it's an opportunity we've been waiting for a while, unfortunately, many people focus on what they want to say. What do I want to say in this short period of time I'm going to have with my audience? So I've got 20 minutes. I've got a lunch with this client. Okay, so I've only got 1 hour and a half. What are the points I want to hit? What material do I want to get across? What are my messages? And if you've just heard the last 5 sentences that came out of my mouth, it's all about my. We put very little thought or time into just sitting down and reflecting on, well, what are they expecting from me? What are their expectations coming into this meeting? What are their pain points? What are they feeling and thinking about me before I meet them? Who's spoken to them about this? Who's spoken to them about this topic before? What level of expertise do they have on the topic? How technical can I get, or non-technical? And very few people do that work. So, for example, in the courses that I run on public speaking, which I've run, like we've over 8,500 people have been through our public speaking course in the last 10 years. We run this, I run this out of my own company. I also run it at ESE Business School on the Executive MBA, which is the #1 Executive MBA in the world at ESE. I run it at corporate universities. Anyway, that's just me plugging my company. One of the first things that we do, which is always surprising for the participants in the course, is that we start off talking about the audience. Who's your audience? And we have a template where we do, it's like if you want to call it an empathy template, where you answer questions about the audience you're about to speak to. And that's even when you're speaking to your own team, who you know very well. You still need to answer some questions about how are they feeling about this? What do they know about the topic previously? If you like, I can share this template with you because it's free for anybody to use. You can put a link to it in the podcast. And it's very simple. It's like a 1-pager, takes 15 minutes, answer the questions, and you're ready to go. Now you have empathy for your audience. So what I say in my courses is that if you're unable to imagine your audience, like, so if I ask you to close your eyes, do you see the people you're speaking to in your mind's eye? And can you see them? If you can't see them, you don't know them. And so many times people go in and make presentations and they don't know anything about the client, about the audience they're going to speak to. All they know and all they've prepared is what they want to say. And that's only half of the story.
I very like that, and I think you give a lot of tactics and impulses where to start. And I can only reflect on most likely I've seen in my life thousands of presentations on conferences, in internal meetings. And I would say 99% of those presentations has been starting from what I want to say and not what my audience want to say. And even if I maybe reflect what my audience want to say, what are the language that my audience speaks and how I can bring this across. And it starts also, and that's, by the way, how we both get together in how I present it. I mean, if I'm really focused on my own stuff, or if I'm open and try to really understand and adapt maybe also on the audience. So I very like your ideas. Let's maybe also switch a little bit the gear, and you, by training a lot of leaders in their presentation and communication skills, what maybe are in particular these days where you work remotely and you have maybe not the possibility of physical presence, what are the main challenges these days for the leaders in this remote setups to not only, let's say, bring empathy across, but also to show presence and interest in the opponents, let's say, or in their teams? What are the biggest challenges? What do you think?
So I think that this world that we're now living in, and that is probably here to stay, where we're going to be working from home more and more, has two main challenges. The first challenge, as you say, is related to your question, which is how to communicate and lead your team when you're not physically in the room with them. And what we can do to maintain that connection with them, that emotional connection, that presence. That's one side. But the other side then is, and I think this is kind of neglected, is how do we manage ourselves from home working? How do we, and not only manage ourselves at home when we're working, but I think there's a major need for people to learn how to manage themselves in a digital world. So what do I mean by that? I mean that we're working with computers, we're working with huge amounts of information, huge amounts of communication. And I don't know about you, Daniel, but for me, I was never taught how to organize my work. I was never taught how to organize the folders on my computer. I was never taught how to take notes. If I'm reading the newspaper and there's an interesting article and there's something that I might use in my work, how do I save that article? How do I save that idea? We all have different ways to do that. Some people put a bookmark. Some people copy and paste it into a Word document that they're keeping. Some people use a tool like Evernote or OneNote. But it's what I call, it's called a digital brain. So how do you manage your digital brain? And we weren't taught how to do that. I've got an 8-year-old daughter. Okay, she's still a bit young, but I don't see kids in school being taught how to do that yet. And yet most of us are working in this digital world and we don't have the tools to organize ourselves. So that's one area. But to answer your question about how to have more presence, how to maintain, let's say, that emotional connection with our team, with our audiences when we're speaking online? Well, I think, first of all, the biggest thing is to have an understanding of everyone's context, that we're all working from home, especially during COVID times. Let's just take the short term. We're all living through COVID. Let's be understanding towards each other. So whenever I start any of my courses or talks or workshops online, the first thing I always say to everyone is, if you're at home, respect your home as a home. Don't pretend it's an office. If your child or partner walks into the room to ask you something, don't shoo them away. I mean, this is your home. And, it's okay. That can happen. If your cat jumps up on the desk, that's all right. We're in our homes. And so it's understandable that our homes are now a mix of workplace and personal space. And we should respect the personal space by allowing it, when it interrupts us, to interrupt us. The next thing I would say is that we need to understand. So the next thing I would say, and this might sound quite simple, but we're doing way too much video calls, way too many. And people are very tired at the end of their workday after doing many, many video calls. And there is this belief out there that the reason why we're getting so tired from doing so many Zoom calls and meetings is because of the lack of intimacy. And actually, it's the opposite. The truth is, and I can see you nodding your head. I imagine maybe you've read this also. Like the studies show that we right now, you and I actually have our video cameras on, even though this is going to be a podcast that's done on audio. I can see you and you can see me. And you seem like a very nice guy, but I don't know you very well. And I'm looking at your face close to the camera. And the only people that I look that closely to are my closest friends and family. And our human brains accept friends and family being that close to us, whether it's video or in real life, looking that closely at them. But it's an overdose of intimacy if we're spending hours every day on video calls with many people watching us and us watching many people. We're getting tired, not from the coldness or the lack of emotion. We're getting tired from an overdose of intimacy. So we should be switching off our cameras way more. We shouldn't be having so many video calls. For example, for me, what I do for my meetings with my team is we switch on the video at the beginning to check in, say hi. It's nice to see everyone's faces, and then cameras off. Sometimes if I'm the one that's speaking, I'll leave my camera on. But there's no point if we're doing slides, even if we're just talking to each other. Cameras off. We done like 80% of the meeting, 90% is done with cameras off. And then we put the cameras on at the end to say goodbye to each other. So it's kind of checking in and checking out. We turn on the cameras. So that would be the next thing I would say is be careful with cameras. The final thing I would say, and I suppose again, I mean, my work and my company's work and classes, I think we're kind of well known for being very practical and hands-on. Not theoretical at all. My great belief when I design my courses is that it should be immediately implementable. If that's a word, you can implement it the moment you hear it.
And of course, that.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, there is theory behind it. I mean, rest assured, and I can share the theory after the class, and I do in the handouts. But I don't get into the theory too much in the course because people just want stuff that they can begin using right now. So. Anyway, so the final thing I would say in getting very practical is get yourself a good microphone. People think about cameras all the time, and people often ask me after my courses, what camera do I use? Because I've got a pretty cool camera and it makes me look very good and I've got lights. But actually, it's way more important to have good sound because sound is what we're most sensitive to. In our video conferencing. I mean, we don't look at the screen so much. We're not looking at people so much when we're in our video conferences. We're actually looking at slides, we're taking notes, but we're constantly listening. We never switch off our listening because we're plugged into earphones. So get yourself a good microphone, and that will make your presence come across even better.
I think also here, I think your aspects are really spot on. I think also what I said the last months to my bosses was that at the end, if everybody works from home, you are in your own little spot. At the end, the connection with other people gets lost somehow. It's kind of feeding out, and it really requires a lot of, let's say, constancy, a lot of intrinsic motivation, and a strong relationship to maintain it. So all these 5 little minutes during a coffee break, grabbing my coffee or walking to the next meeting, that are not just there. And I think that are the little moments where you talk with your colleagues, with maybe your team. Look, how was the birthday of your daughter? How was the last week you had a big birthday party? This kind of talks that are missing. Of course, these days it's quite common that you do kind of a coffee break or a coffee meet up virtual, but I found it very artificial. Now you have half an hour to talk about what you do in your leisure time, and I think that not really how I want to call it nice. It's kind of a forced socializing, which I think is not really appropriate, nor it really engages the same way like we would have maybe a quick chit chat on a coffee, grabbing a coffee. And I think this little moments, together with the different aspects you mentioned, makes it so hard for leaders at these days to keep the emotional connect to the staff, which is so important because they need also support. I think you as a leader are even more required these days than even before.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with you completely about these types of dynamics. So one of the things that we do in Performing Ideas is we design events. I call myself. I find it hard to define what I do actually, because I feel like I invented my job for myself, because I started off. I studied philosophy. I was a writer. I was a theater director, and then in my early 30s, I kind of stumbled into this world of executive education and leadership, and then I found my place. And but I don't really, when people say, "What do you do?" I find it hard to explain what I do, because I do many things. When you asked me at the beginning to define what tell everyone about myself in 30 seconds, I always go, oh God, what do I do? I'm a consultant, am I? I have a company. So what I also tell people is I'm an experienced designer, which sounds very fancy. And what that means is I design events. Now, most of the events that I design are my own events. So what do I mean by an event? Sometimes that's a workshop. Sometimes that's an expert meeting. Sometimes that's, like, for example, I designed an event for Mobile World Congress this year in Barcelona, which got cancelled eventually, but they went ahead with my event, which was for I was asked by a group called the Digital Future Society, DFS, which is part of Mobile World, to organize an event for 200 participants. It was a public-private partnership. So we had politicians, and we had people from NGOs, and we had leaders from companies coming together to discuss the future of big data, the future of transport, the future of cities, the future of the environment. And I designed that. So I've got as I say, one of the other areas that I work in is in innovation. And I do workshops on moonshot thinking, on futures thinking. So we did a futures workshop. And so I call it designing an experience, because they come together. We were face to face. It was just before COVID really hit. And we had 200 people face to face, and bringing them on a journey, on an experience where they built different versions of the future. Why am I getting into this? I've forgotten what your question was. Why did I start telling you about experience design? Yes, because you were telling me about about these get-togethers, these virtual get-togethers for beers. Yeah. So I was like, I do a lot of experience design, and we're kind of well known for doing highly interactive, very well designed face-to-face events. And in the last year, I've had to completely change that and become a designer of online events, which thankfully has worked out really well for us, because I think there's a lot of work to be done in designing good online events. So we've been very busy doing that for the last few months, as you can imagine. And like, that's one of the things that I would never do. Like, I hate those. Honestly, I hate those, like, virtual water cooler, coffee, drinks, and people do their best, and they hire a platform like Verbella or one of these, like, where you have avatars and you have people walking around, and like there's a disco and dancing. I mean, I don't know. I've met very few people that have enjoyed them. It's very, very hard to recreate that atmosphere. However, what you can do, and what I would always recommend leaders to do, is to check in with their team, but on a one-to-one basis. Have a quick telephone call, and just check in with them on a telephone call. And this is really easy, because I don't know about you, but have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're WhatsApping, or you're in Microsoft Teams chatting, or in Slack, and you're chatting over and back with a member of your team for about 5 or 10 minutes, writing sentences and answering sentences? Like, if you get into a conversation like that, you have the feeling this is going to go on, because there's a lot to be answered here. Pick up the phone and do it spoken, speak to them. And I think this is because then you do two things at the same time. You answer their questions, you manage to get done what's needed to get done, but you also get to check in with them, and you get to maintain that connection with them, that emotional connection, if you wish. And you also find out about stuff that's going on in their life. So whenever I find myself getting into a Slack or a WhatsApp chat with a member of my team or someone that I know, I always pick up the phone and ring them, because if obviously if they're available to be chatting to you, they're probably available to pick up the phone and talk to you. So it's a good way to keep in touch with them, and it also overcomes that problem of cold calling them. It's so rare these days that we actually phone each other. And often, if you just phone someone, they might not pick up. But if they're online chatting to you in Slack, then phone them, and then they're probably available to speak.
I like that. Actually, I have a rule. So 3 lines of context would mean for me an email. 1 line would be a chat. And if you need really more than 3 lines, you pick up the phone, because there's no way out that you need, or you can bring this message with a clear objective, let's say via an email across. So it's always easier to phone and to outline what is your need, your desire, or whatever. What is the task that you want to perform? Another aspect that I wanted to touch base is very interesting. Virtual, let's say, conferences. And I have been invited, I think the last year, to so many different formats, and many at the beginning in particular has been just copy of physical conferences, which my own experiences that never really worked out very well, because it would be just let's say a lineup of one presentation after the other. And what I also have seen quite often were kind of panel discussion setups. But I think also here we would need to put ourselves into the idea that the short term there will be no much, let's say, physical big conferences in place. So I think we will need to find new ways, and I'm happy that you offer certain services and have experience in that for virtual, let's say, conferences that bring in the different aspects of socializing, of getting new insights. And of course, here I think you bring in a lot of stuff to the table. So maybe in 1, 2, 3 sentences, what are your learnings in particular now for the speakers or those leaders who have a lot of speaking slots as well, or do virtual team meetings? Maybe 2, 3 ideas or impulses from you as well.
So first of all, I was involved, as I say, I was involved a lot in designing face-to-face conferences as well. And even the traditional format of speakers followed by Q&A is also something that needs to be disrupted immensely, because it doesn't work, as we all know. Like going to a conference and watching 15 talks one after the other is just terrible. You need to switch up the dynamics. So I had plenty of dynamics for doing that face to face. Now that it's online, there's two things for conferences. And I know you asked me about speakers, but I'll first address just for designers of conferences. The 2 things that we need to get used to and that we need to take advantage of when it comes to online conferences are, 1, we need to become more used to, or we need to get away from this synchronous. Everything needs to be synchronous, that we have to be all together at the same time. The great thing about digital stuff is that we can do stuff asynchronously and synchronously. So pre-recorded content that the audience can watch. So for example, let me give you this isn't for a conference, but let me give you a format that I use for my courses, for some of my courses, which I think takes full advantage of this digital world, which I think can be applied to conferences as well. So for any of my courses, my preferred format would be over, let's say, 4 weeks. You have a group of people, and it's three. They come in. They're with me 3 nights a week, 3 evenings a week. Okay. Now it's only for 1 hour each evening. 1 hour, 1 hour and a half. The first on Monday, they receive a pre-recorded lecture by me, so they get access to a video, and they've got 48 hours to watch that. Why is it pre-recorded? Because there's no need for them to have to be at the same, log into a Zoom at a certain time with me in order to deliver a presentation. I mean, they can just watch a pre-recorded version. It's also best for me as the speaker, which was your question, because I can make a really top class version of that with no mistakes. I'm not fluffing my lines. I can record without any great equipment that class or my talk, if you wish. So that comes out on a Monday. Then on a Wednesday, and I'm talking about, let's say this is with a group of maybe 60 people, between 20 and 60 people, depends on how many I have. On Wednesday, we all get together, and this is synchronous, and I'm in front of them for 1 hour and a half, and that's basically Q&A with breakout rooms, deep dives into certain areas of that lecture that they've all watched from the Monday. And that happens on a Wednesday. And then on the Thursday, they go into a breakout room with one of my coaches. So I've got 12 coaches working with me, all proper professional coaches, all trained in my methodology and know my material. And then on Thursday, you get to go into a breakout room. You get to go into a coaching session with 5 or 6 other people. You get to present the work you've been doing. You get to the other people in the group at a much more intimate level. You get expert advice from the coach, who are all like me, experts on the topic. And that's over 5 weeks. And so even though it's an online course, you end up getting a huge amount of face-to-face contact with me, who's the designer of the course. You get a huge amount of contact face-to-face with your coach. You get a huge amount of contact and getting to know other people in the course, and you get all the knowledge. So so the reason I'm telling you this is, in that course, we're combining the great elements of doing stuff online, being able to go into small breakout groups, being able to have access to an expert and ask them questions, and being able to do stuff asynchronously because we can just download and watch a video.
I love it, Brian, and I fear we could talk for the next 50 days or so. I really like your insights, and it really motivates and drives me. So let's maybe come to an end by usually what I always ask or want to ask by coming to the end is, what would be your, let's say, career advice, or your what would you have said yourself before you started your professional career to become, let's say, a leader or a leader whisperer these days?
Well, I think never mind becoming a leader, just becoming a better person, a more balanced person, a more less stressful person. I think is to train yourself in the things that, for some crazy reason, our educational system doesn't train us in. So I would get training, read books, come to trainings on communication, learn how to communicate, learn how to speak in public, learn how to write, learn how to do it online or face-to-face, learn about body language, learn about structuring your ideas. So learn about communication. We don't get taught that at school. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing is learn how to manage your time, because we don't get taught time management. So how to manage your time and attention in a digital world where Facebook and Instagram and social media and the news cycles are constantly trying to catch our attention. Learn how to manage your own attention, because if you don't learn how to manage that, you will become addicted to all that stuff. So learn how to manage your attention and learn how to manage your time. And the final thing is to learn how to have what I call this digital brain. Learn how to manage information, learn how to manage these digital tools, email, note-taking, reading online, listening to podcasts like this one, watching YouTube videos. Don't just sit there passively watching this stuff. If you hear interesting things, have a system for capturing it, and have a system for turning what you capture into ideas that you can publish to the world, because we're all going to have to publish our ideas and have blogs and have websites and have what people call a personal brand, whatever, to show to the world, because the future workplace, the future marketplace for work, people are going to be looking for your online presence, and they're going to want to read, listen, and watch you on videos. And you need to have that stuff prepared. So those are the three areas that I would say. Communication, if you self-management would be the other one, and knowledge management.
Wow, Brian, I think that are awesome summaries of every leader to capture and to work against. So thank you so much for your insights. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast. And looking forward to stay in touch with you.
Thank you, Daniel. It was a great pleasure too. It was a really nice conversation. Thank you.
Go4Leadership, the podcast.